Something happened at the Pentagon that nobody saw coming. A prayer service. Military personnel gathered, heads bowed, a moment of reverence in the heart of American defense. And then Pete Hegseth opened his mouth. What came out wasn't what anyone expected. Not from a Secretary of Defense. Not in a sacred moment. Not in front of the people who serve this country. Because the words he chose weren't from Scripture. They weren't from military tradition. They were from a Quentin Tarantino movie. And the room didn't know how to react. The Pentagon prayer service is supposed to be solemn, respectful. A moment where military leaders acknowledge something greater than themselves, where they seek guidance, where they honor the weight of their responsibilities. Every Secretary of Defense before Hegseth understood this. They chose their words carefully. They spoke with humility. They recognized the gravity of leading the Department of Defense. But Pete Hegseth had a different idea. He stood before assembled military personnel, before officers and enlisted, before people who risk their lives every single day, and he recited a prayer from Pulp Fiction. The path of the righteous man. Those were the opening words. And if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what comes next. Ezekiel 25:17. Except it's not really Ezekiel, it's Samuel L. Jackson playing a hitman, a fictional character delivering a monologue before executing someone, a Hollywood creation written for shock value and dramatic effect. And Hegseth stood there in the Pentagon, in a prayer service, and delivered those lines like they were sacred text, like they belonged in that moment, like nobody would notice. But people noticed. They noticed immediately. Some in the room recognized it instantly, the valley of darkness, the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness. Those aren't words of comfort. Those aren't words of faith. Those are words from a revenge fantasy, from a crime thriller, from a movie about violence and retribution. And Hegseth delivered them with conviction, like he'd found something profound, like this was the message military personnel needed to hear. Here's what makes this moment so revealing. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't an accident. Hegseth chose those words deliberately. He prepared for this moment. He stood in front of that room and decided that a Tarantino movie quote was appropriate for a Pentagon prayer service. And what does that tell you? It tells you he doesn't understand the difference between entertainment and reality, between Hollywood and actual military service, between performance and leadership. He spent so long in television, so long performing for cameras, that he can't separate movie dialogue from genuine spiritual guidance. The real Ezekiel passage exists. It's in the Bible. It talks about judgment and accountability, about God's wrath against the wicked, but it doesn't sound like the Pulp Fiction version. Because Tarantino rewrote it, he added lines, changed the meaning, turned it into a monologue about personal vengeance. And that's what Hegseth recited. Not Scripture, not the actual biblical text, the Hollywood version. The version where Jules Winfield talks about striking down with great vengeance and furious anger. The version that ends with someone getting shot in the face. Military personnel stood there listening, some with their eyes closed, some with heads bowed, expecting words of wisdom, words of strength, words that acknowledge the sacred responsibility of defending the nation. And instead, they got a movie quote from a film about gangsters and violence, from a scene that's memorable because of how over the top it is, how theatrical, how completely disconnected from actual faith or spirituality. And Hegseth delivered it like it meant something, like he'd discovered some hidden truth. This wasn't the first time Hegseth confused entertainment with reality. His entire career has been built on television, on Fox News segments, on saying things that sound good on camera, on performing patriotism instead of living it. And now he's brought that same approach to the Pentagon, to actual military leadership, to moments that require genuine gravitas. But he doesn't have it. He has movie quotes, he has sound bites, he has performances that fall flat the moment anyone examines them closely. The worst part isn't just that he quoted Pulp Fiction, it's that he thought it was appropriate, that his judgment told him this was the right move, that standing in front of military personnel, in a prayer service, in the Pentagon, the right thing to do was channel Samuel L. Jackson's hitman character. What does that say about his understanding of the role, about his respect for military tradition, about his ability to read a room and understand what's actually needed in that moment. Some people defend it. They say it's just a movie quote, just words, that everyone's overreacting. But that misses the entire point. The Secretary of Defense isn't just anyone. The Pentagon prayer service isn't just any moment. These are people who serve, who sacrifice, who need leaders who understand the weight of what they're doing. And Hegseth gave them Hollywood. He gave them performance. He gave them the same kind of theatrical nonsense he's been delivering since day one. Military chaplains prepare carefully for these services. They choose readings that speak to service and sacrifice, that acknowledge fear and courage, that provide genuine spiritual support to people facing real danger. They understand that words matter, that in these moments people are looking for something real, something authentic, something that connects to their deepest values and beliefs. And then Pete Hegseth shows up and turns it into a Tarantino film festival. The comparison is stark. Previous secretaries of defense understood solemnity. They understood that leading the military isn't a performance. It's a sacred trust. They chose their words carefully in moments like these. They recognize that military personnel deserve respect, deserve leaders who take their roles seriously, who don't confuse movies with reality, who understand the difference between entertainment and actual spiritual guidance. But Hegseth doesn't see that difference. To him, it's all content, all performance, all about sounding tough and memorable. And that's the pattern. Every public appearance, every speech, every moment in front of cameras, Hegseth reaches for the dramatic, for the quotable, for the thing that sounds good without caring whether it's appropriate. We negotiate with bombs, loitering over Tehran, and now Pulp Fiction prayers. It's all the same approach. Say something that sounds tough, something that gets attention, something that might go viral. Never mind if it's true, never mind if it's appropriate, never mind if it actually serves the people listening. Military personnel deserve better. They deserve leaders who understand the gravity of war, who respect tradition and protocol, who know when to be serious and when performance is inappropriate. They deserve someone who wouldn't stand in a prayer service and quote a revenge fantasy, someone who understands that faith and spirituality aren't props for looking cool, someone who respects them enough to be genuine instead of theatrical. The Valley of Darkness line hits different when you're actually sending people into darkness, when you're making decisions that put lives at risk, when you're responsible for troops in combat zones facing real enemies and real danger. In that context, a movie quote isn't inspiring. It's insulting. It shows a fundamental disconnect between the person speaking and the reality of what's being asked of the people listening. They don't need Jules Winfield. They need a leader who understands what they're facing. This moment reveals everything about Pete Hegseth's approach to leadership. He treats serious moments like content opportunities. He confuses being memorable with being effective. He thinks sounding tough is the same as being strong, and he's built an entire career on that confusion. On Fox News it worked. Viewers loved it. It got ratings. It made him famous. But the Pentagon isn't Fox News. Military service isn't entertainment, and prayer isn't performance. The silence after he finished must have been deafening. People processing what they just heard, wondering if he really just quoted Pulp Fiction in a prayer service, wondering if their Secretary of Defense understands the difference between movies and real life, wondering what other Hollywood scenes he's planning to recreate in future Pentagon moments, wondering if this is what leadership looks like now. Performance over substance, style over understanding, movie quotes over genuine wisdom. And here's the thing that makes it worse. Hegseth probably thought it went well, probably thought he nailed it, that he'd found a cool way to connect faith and toughness, that he'd delivered something memorable and powerful, because he doesn't have the judgment to see how inappropriate it was, how disrespectful, how completely out of touch with what that moment required. He's so deep in performance mode that he can't see the difference anymore. Can't recognize when he's crossed a line. Military families watching this must wonder who's really in charge of defending the nation, wonder if the person making life and death decisions understands the weight of those choices, wonder if he takes anything seriously or if it's all just content to him. all just moments to perform, all just opportunities to sound cool and get attention. Because that's what Pulp Fiction prayers suggest, that even sacred moments are just stages, just chances to deliver memorable lines. This wasn't leadership. This was cosplay. Pete Hegseth, dressed up as Secretary of Defense, standing in the Pentagon, going through the motions, hitting what he thought were the right beats, but using someone else's script, someone else's words, because he doesn't have his own. He doesn't have the depth or understanding to speak authentically in these moments. So he borrows, he quotes, he performs, and he thinks nobody will notice the difference between real and fake. But everyone noticed. The military personnel in that room, the chaplains who actually understand spiritual leadership, the veterans watching from home, the families who need to believe their loved ones are led by someone serious. They all noticed. They all saw a Fox News host playing Secretary of Defense, quoting movies in moments that demand authenticity, performing when performance is the last thing needed. And they all wondered the same thing. How did we get here? How did this person end up in this position? And how long before his confusion of entertainment and reality costs lives? The path of the righteous man. That's how the quote starts. But there's nothing righteous about using Hollywood dialogue in a Pentagon prayer service. There's nothing righteous about treating military personnel like an audience instead of people who deserve genuine leadership. There's nothing righteous about being so detached from reality that you can't tell the difference between Tarantino and Scripture. And there's nothing righteous about a Secretary of Defense who thinks his job is to perform instead of lead. Pete Hegseth stood in that room, delivered his Pulp Fiction prayer, and revealed exactly who he is. Not a leader, not someone who understands the weight of the position, just a performer, playing a part, reading someone else's lines, and completely missing the point of everything he's supposed to represent.